Hi, I'm Dr. Laura Marsh. I'm a scientist who works in the field of biology and ecology and anthropology, and I've been steeped in this business of coronavirus from the very beginning, in part because my colleagues and friends who I worked with as a scientist for Los Alamos National Laboratory are currently working as epidemiologists, as modelers, and virologists in this pandemic and have done for decades. And I've been someone who, for years, has been a public speaker and someone who's quite good about taking complex things and talking to the public about it. So that's why I'm here today. So one of the things I like to do is I like to bring the narrative of complex issues to the most basic pieces. And in this discussion in these United States during this time when we're having a lot of sound bites about what's right, what's wrong, what's misinformation, what's not, let's break it down to the components before we even talk about the disease. So let's talk about belief versus fact. And it's really simple. Belief is basically a thought that we hear repeated over and over until we believe that it makes sense or that there's a truth to it. Now, sure, there's a whole philosophical world about truth, but that in its nutshell, this is what belief is. Fact, on the other hand, is based on evidence. That's it. It's either scientific evidence, or let's say you're a criminal and somebody's going to figure out if you did the thing, right? There's evidence to go and look for your fingerprints and the blood smears and all that stuff, right? We watch a lot of crime shows. Same thing for scientists. Only ours is much, much simpler and something we all do as a public, which is we ask questions. Scientists ask a question: what is COVID? What is this virus? Where is this virus? Then there's a whole suite of methodology to answer that question depending on what you're trying to get at. And then at the end of the day, there'll be an answer. Might be a good answer, might be a crappy answer, but at the end of the day, it's an answer. And this is all that a fact is having evidence based on a thought process that gives you a result. And so one of the problems we're having in our narrative today is because we are independent people, and the United States is based on independence. We love the fact that we're individuals, but we're in a public health crisis. By the very nature of public, it means we all kind of have to do the same thing to get a result that's beneficial for us all. But we're all hopelessly independent and think that our independence then can be equal to what is being said in terms of fact-based evidentiary information for then how we must proceed. And that's where some of the shift I think is happening, is that we're used to having our own rights, our own ways. We're able to say and do whatever we want as a person in the United States. Generally that works for us, and we can talk about how it does or does not. But in a public health, the very word public means you're not an individual anymore. You're doing things that the group is doing on behalf of the group. And I think that's culturally where we're getting misstepped. And then in terms of belief versus fact, where we're getting a misstep, because social media allows us to have a voice. And sometimes that voice is misconstrued as equivalent to evidence. So it was interesting to me that Dr. Fauci addressed the business of the difference between politics and policy, which, even I had to think about it a minute. But let's connect that back to what I was talking about in terms of belief versus fact. Politics is based on the world of ideas and the world of impressions about what society needs and how to move it forward. But there's a potentially personal agenda sometimes embedded within politics. Policy, in its purest form in the United States, is meant to be based on evidence and is meant to be based on fact of how then to create a situation in a law, perhaps, that then governs the people in a way that is based on evidence, whether it's based on a previous law, whether it's based on actual fact and science, which is what you want your health policies to be. Problem we're having now, of course, is those things are really gamushed together for some reason. So we're getting policies that are purely political that aren't necessarily based on the facts that we typically want them to be based on. So there's a gamush in there, but they are two very separate things. If we think in terms of this pandemic from the virus's perspective, this is a small organism. It's basically a Vespa next to a bus. If you think of a bacteria as a bus and a Vespa, like the little motorcycle jobbers that you ride around, as a virus, it's a teeny tiny little organism. It can go everywhere. It's one of the reasons why it's really plaguing us as humans. But the deal is that if you're a virus, you're thinking in terms of population biology. You want to replicate as fast as possible in hosts as much as possible and get as far as you possibly can, because that's how you live. Viruses have to have a host, right? Which is why we say after about 72 hours, it dies on a surface, because it's not a good enough host to keep it alive. So from the virus's perspective, if we don't wear masks and we don't keep away from each other and we want to commingle and the virus is present, the virus is like, woohoo, this is perfect. I can run around, I can break off chilies, I can do all kinds of like whatever I'm gonna do in my life, because from the virus perspective, we're allowing it to maintain its stance in the population. From a human perspective, of course, we are hearing all the public health reasons why it's a bad idea for the virus to get its way. But the more we allow it to spread, the more we allow it to be in the population, that's when we start seeing problems with people who get sick and go to hospital and potentially die, right? So now here we are in October, and we started the virus back in January in another country, right? Actually in December in China, right? It got to us finally in February, and the question is, why is it that people get it? Why is it so easy? And we've talked about it, and it looks like the biggest way, is aerosolized particles from humans to humans. That means if you have enough of the virus in your body, just in conversation, in laughing, certainly in sneezing. I don't know if you've ever gotten online and seen the like sneeze thing where it's like, boom, it's like a cannon going off, right? So dropules coming from a human that'll float around in the air and get to another human is basically the most effective way for this virus to transfer around, which is why we get freaked out about big crowds. It's why we get freaked out about being inside. It's why we get freaked out about no masks and being so close in proximity to each other. So then you say, wow, but what about surfaces? And what about all that stuff? Yeah, okay, yes. If somebody gacked onto a surface and you came by and touched the gack and you put it in your mouth, okay, you're transferring it to you. It's a much harder transfer, though, from surfaces. Am I saying don't wipe down surfaces? No, but if I'm talking about something like a film production, for instance, and you're working inside, do I want to spend all my money wiping off surfaces and testing for temperatures? No. What you want to do is air control, air filtration, making sure that there's a lot of space around people, keeping absolutely everyone masked until the last minute if they don't have to be, and washing your hands and keeping it from touching surfaces and going in your mouth. That's it. That's the directive. And that's what we have learned. And again, we're only in October of 2020. We'll get to January and February next year and still say, we've only had this for a year. So it takes a long time to figure out some of these things, but the basic mechanism we figured out. You get it? Through this. Okay? That's the biggest way you get it. So if you can protect this, then you're in pretty good shape. Okay, so some further clarification just about how we get this virus, what's the dealio and whatever. So I'm gonna do a little mask demo. One of the things we're realizing is that, of course, the nose is one of the places we're finding it to be quite effective to get into the human body, which is why the lungs get impacted, which is why we're testing through the nose by and large. That said, it's not a respiratory disease, it's a circulatory disease. Even though this is getting into your body through your nose and going to your lungs, it's really going out to the rest of your body. And in people who are asymptomatic, for instance, that really doesn't matter at the end of the day, because you could be harboring virus in your body that is going to continue doing circulatory damage to you, even if you never had a symptom from the initial infection. Okay, So why is it important then to cover our noses as well as our mouths in the business of working around each other and being around each other? Here's why. Okay, check this out. Here's my mouth, right? So if I go, ha-choo, I've covered it, I'm protecting you, right? But if you are breathing in my vicinity in any form or fashion, my nose is out. I just told you the nose is the most available receptor for the virus. So you're infecting, you're doing it to yourself more than anybody else through your nose. Put it on. It's not going to kill you. It is not going to kill you. And it is so important, if we're going to be working around each other, to everybody try to do the same thing. If we can all do the same thing together, then it is a public response, not an individual response. It is a public response. It really technically is not your right to decide in a public health crisis whether or not you will follow the public health guidelines. It's not your choice. It isn't. You basically become a cow, and you get to be part of this group that is trying to do all the same thing, walk to the water trough in the same way. That's what we're doing here. So if you're in the film industry and you're in the production office, let me give you an example that we've had in the state of New Mexico about a problem area for where we perceive that some of the virus is being spread kind of unwittingly. I was recently at Verizon and I was getting a phone. Fine. Everybody's masked in the lobby. I was working with someone who was masked and we were working with each other, getting our things together. He walked in the back office, production office, and took off his mask because somehow that was magically safer and different than out in the lobby. So one of the things we have to be really cautious about with each other is the fact that if you're human and I'm a human, there is no magical space you can be in where you can have your mask off. That's not a thing. There's no magic to it. The virus, remember the biology of the virus? It wants to get around. It wants to populate. It wants to be everywhere it can be, which means you going into a production office doesn't make it safer just because you're in a production office. You wear your mask 100% of the time you're around other human beings. So there's a narrative and a behavior in the United States where, because of our feeling that we have individual choice, which mostly we do, but again, public health crisis, so technically no, that you get the choice of whether or not to wear a mask. And some people, and rightly so, have things like asthma or COPD or trouble breathing. So there's a couple of ways to think about this, both if you're one of those people or you're around someone who's like that. The first is, if you truly have trouble breathing with a mask, and I'm here to tell you that it's just not a thing, because surgeons, people who work in construction who wear much, much heavier masks, and ventilators, people who work in fires who are wearing those big ventilators with the big filtration, those are hard to breathe in. The little masks that we're asking everyone to wear, not hard to breathe in. So it can be a mental game, and I get that. And for some people it's quite real, and I get that, and I want to respect that. That said, then don't go out in public. The directive right now is wear a mask. If you feel you cannot, then don't go. Find someone else to shop for you, have your groceries come to your house. If you're truly someone who's suffering from a respiratory illness, wear something like one of the lighter surgical masks. It will only protect you 50%, they say, but that's 50% more than none. They're very light and easy to breathe through, and you're helping from when you sneeze and whatever to get particles on another person, as well as helping protect yourself. It will not exacerbate your asthma. It will not harm you. Now, if you're going to go full respirator, yeah, those things are horrible and they're hard to wear for a long time. I have trouble breathing in them, and I don't have asthma or COPD. So get a mask that's appropriate, that will help you enough in the public arena if you must go to the store by yourself. And if you really truly are suffering from a lung problem, stay home, have somebody else help you. And I think that's the best way to do it. And don't throw down and fight with each other in a store. The directive is wear a mask. Period. So if you're in the film industry, you're probably very familiar with this concept of Zone A. You're very conscious of the white pages. You're very conscious of all of the other material, particularly coming out of Los Angeles, and the discussions that have been coming out of crews that have already been working about how best to manage a set and how best to manage actors and others in this situation. And the basic formula is very, very simple. Again, if it's based on aerosolized droplets, you must have either good fans, open doors. If you can't do that because it's a closed set, you have to have good filtration system, and 100% masks on 100% of the people unless you're acting. And you need to be testing, because this business of temperatures, we've found over time, is just a waste of money. Don't waste your money buying a bunch of thermometers and testing people's temperatures. I mean, it's meaningless, because you can also be able to have COVID and not have a temperature, right? And you can also be shedding the virus and be testing negative. So my directive on the testing is be tested and use PCRs, please. Testing is trust a positive and be wary of a negative, right? So you've been tested, you feel like you're negative. It doesn't just mean, woo, I get to woo, 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 woo. No, but if your actors have all tested negative and nobody is demonstrating any symptoms and we feel everybody's okay, yeah, they're maskless, they're working together. The minute they're not, masks go back on and you're back into the situation. There's no safe zone where just, I don't know, grips and cameras and boom operators get to just not wear a mask. That's not a thing. Everybody in a mask 100% of the time. Stay away from each other. And even once we have a vaccine, we can talk about vaccines. There's a lot to say about vaccines. But even once there's a vaccine, it doesn't just say, hooray, we're all, woo, we're free at this point. Not for the first round of vaccines. Let's talk about testing, because there's a great deal of confusion, particularly for the film industry. There's rapid tests, there's less rapid tests, and then there's blood tests, right? And so you're thinking, well, what are they? What is the difference? Okay. The test that's most accepted, for instance, the state of New Mexico, is the PCR test. It's still shoving a swab up your nose, trying to get the bug. And mind you, you may be positive, but come out negative, because the virus doesn't live in your nose forever. There's a real small window of time, and I don't remember the number of days exactly, let's call it a week. I don't think it's quite that long, that if you happen to catch the bug in your nose, you're gonna be positive with that swab. Otherwise, you're still positive and cruising around doing your thing and infecting others. Okay, got a swab. What do you do with that swab? That's a live virus test. We're trying to figure out if you, person A, are infected right this minute. Shove it up your nose, get the goop, stick it in a tube. Two ways to analyze it. One is PCR. We call that bench science because they run it through a machine, a PCR machine, that tests out the proteins, the RNAs, and looks for that characteristic signature of that virus in that machine, which is why it takes a little bit longer. The antigen test, I think it's a chemical reaction test, which is why it's faster, is not as approved by the state of New Mexico, for instance, for anyone who's potentially asymptomatic. Who's asymptomatic? Between 50 and 80% of the cases. A lot of people are asymptomatic. And we'll talk about asymptomatics in a minute, what that means for you, because it's not chickenpox. It's not, woo, we just da-da-da. So antigen tests then are done quickly, but they have a 30% false negative, which means you can be tested negative and you're definitely positive and you're infecting others. It's only used in the state of New Mexico and most other states, pre-surgery, for instance, in someone who's presumed to be positively shedding and symptomatic of the virus. But for asymptomatic people, which it sounds like it's a lot of us, you never use it. What is an antibody test? Antigen is a live virus. Do you have the illness today? Antibody is a blood test to determine if you have had it before and your body creates antibodies, these organisms that fight off disease, right? Completely different worlds of test. So you may be wondering at this point, this late in the game in the pandemic in the United States, why is it we're only hearing federally from Dr. Fauci as an expert. Sure, we have loads of other researchers. We have Big Pharma. We have some of these other cats that are out talking to us, rightfully so, about the science that they're doing and the modeling they're doing. But where are all the federal scientists? Did you even know there were federal scientists? And the reason why you don't is because as early as late January, certainly into February, federal scientists who are epidemiologists, virologists, and modelers on behalf of pandemics for decades, and or who had been on the pandemic federal task force for the last 10 years and had that removed in the last 2 years, were put under a federal gag order by the White House. They were told, you cannot speak to the public. You can do your research as long as there's funding, and that's starting to dwindle under this current administration. But you can't talk to the public. You're done. Cease and desist. No more speaking directly to the public about your research. Has that stopped them from publishing? No. Has it stopped them from doing the research? No. They're all doing that. And you can, of course, go to the literature and see what they've been working on. The federal scientists in our state at the big laboratories, national laboratories that we have here in New Mexico, have been absolutely informing our governor, which is why New Mexico has been doing so well for so long with managing the virus, because they're listening to the scientists who are actually the national scientists working on this. So first of all, in my opinion, I think it's the opinion of most scientists, this virus and this pandemic has zero to do with politics. It has zero to do with politics. We've made it that way in the United States because we're people and that's what we do and whatever. But as a virus, and as far as scientists are concerned, whether they're working for Big Pharma or they're working for the federal government, we want solutions and we want to do them appropriately and we want to do them safely. The difference is, in our country, the reason why it appears to us, for those of us in more the federal side of the science world, that the current administration is interested in giving funding to things like Big Pharma or some of these bigger agencies as opposed to this equivalent amount of money. Now, I'm not saying that they never gave money, because they did. They gave money to research scientists in the federal government as well, but not on the same magnitude, right? And the reason why is simply this. They're interested in commerce more than the public getting a free vaccine. If you do something through the federal government, and the federal government developed the vaccine, and the federal government figured out the mechanism for manufacturing it quickly, it would be free to the public because it's your tax dollars that's being paid for the scientists to work on these things. If your tax dollars go to Big Pharma or to a competitive entity that has worked, that's commerce. And now it's all about making money. Whether or not it makes money for the federal government, we don't know, but it's competition in a different payment group. So let's talk a minute about vaccines. We are in October of the first year of the pandemic, and typically vaccines take at a minimum 4 years to develop. The fact that we're even talking about one that might be slightly, even possibly useful by the end of this year is ridiculous. In the world of vaccines, is ridiculous. Does it mean it's less effective? Does it mean it's rubbish? No. What it means is just we've really nipped this thing along. But that said, because of the nature of this virus, one of the things that we're learning, again, at this point in history, talk to me next year at this time, we may have a completely different story in terms of how our antibodies behave, how the vaccine has been developed, and what is actually efficacious for us. We're not going to know that right now. What we are going to know is once the scientists and whomsoever is listening to whoever's speaking, don't listen to a politician, don't listen to anyone other than a scientist and not a radiologist and not just some guy who's a doctor or even me. You want to hear it from epidemiologists, virologists, the people who are creative, vaccinologists, if that's a thing, Dr. Fauci perhaps, that says to you, this thing's okay to take, boom, then do it. And here's the thing. As of today, antibodies seem to last about 4 months. But again, we're only in October, so we don't know. But at this point, it looks like they sort of peter out after about 4 months. There are 7 clades, 7 types of this particular coronavirus, meaning that if you get one and mount antibodies that last 4 months, you might get another one that makes you sick. And or you might get another one that mounts a different set of antibodies. We just don't know enough about that yet. If you get a vaccine at this point, what they're saying today, it'll be different potentially in January, is that you can get a vaccine. It may only be 50% efficacious. Now, what does that mean? It's very similar to our annual flu vaccines, where you get a flu vaccine and it helps you for the viruses that were the year previous, not this year's viruses. So that means if you got something that was this year's virus that was not in that mix, you might get sick, okay? 50% efficacy means that you take it and at least you're half protected. And then you wear your mask. Hopefully that's 100% protected, but it doesn't mean we just go, woo, oxygen free, we're good. No, it still means we're doing the same thing we're doing probably for the next couple of years until the global population comes up to at least 50% protected. Now, they're also saying because of this wibbity-wabbity business of how long your antibodies may be effective for you and protecting you, you may have to get a booster. So you get one, and then in 6 months, you got to get another one. You still may only be half protected, but you say, well, then why should I even take it? Why should I even bother? Here's why. Because right now, 0% of humans are protected from this virus, even if you've had it before. Because again, if it wanes in 4 months, you can get it again. And we're demonstrating that now. So you want to take it so the amount of people who can be receptors, yes, thank you, for the amount of people who are receptors for the virus is less. So coronavirus is not the flu. This coronavirus. Now, you have had a coronavirus before. Have you had a cold? You probably had a coronavirus. This CoV-2, this SARS-CoV-2 is a completely different complex that humans have not interacted with before. It has a much, much higher death rate than the flu. The reason why we're starting to see deaths taper off in the United States is because we've figured out how not to kill people in the hospital. It's not because the virus is different. It's because we have adapted to work with that bug, okay? People want to bring up, oh, the avian flu. Okay, let's go there. H1N1 is now in your flu shot. It is just not as easy to pass, it turns out, as this particular coronavirus. It is a flu, yes. Was it deadly? Yes, because again, it was not at the time, it was a novel virus that humans hadn't seen before. Not as deadly. This one, super deadly, right? Flu, you take a little NyQuil. This thing, you potentially go to the hospital, get on a respirator, and die. So there's a kind of an interesting bundle of information out there about vaccines. So the short answer is yes, in a vaccine. Now every vaccine is a little bit different. Some are live virus, some are killed virus, and I think that there's a third category which I'm not completely sure about. There are binders that they have found have been effective for managing that entity, if you will, whether dead or alive, in the little shot that you get. Now, some people are concerned there's things like aluminum and other things. Now, I haven't looked up what the chemistry is for this particular vaccine. You can look up other ones. And the answer is this. It is such a minimal amount that you would get in any vaccine that the benefit you're getting for not dying from COVID, for getting a vaccine, and for not spreading it around is thousands of times above whatever minuscule amount of some other binder you might be getting. Because for one thing, your liver and kidneys will flush out heavy metals. And if they don't flush it out, they will accumulate them. And if you bioaccumulate them in a huge amount, then it's deadly. Theoretically, you could take every vaccine ever offered on Earth. You're still not going to get a bioaccumulation of any of those additional products that'll do any damage to any system anywhere. And forget about the questions about, oh, it makes you be on the spectrum and oh my God. None of that is true. It's been shown over and over that none of that is true. And the effectiveness of not having smallpox, not having polio, not having measles, not having COVID-19 is outweighing in society around the world this minuscule potential bioaccumulation or excretion, which is typically what happens in the body. And oh, by the way, if you read your vitamins, you're taking aluminum, you're taking copper, you're taking metals every day in your garden variety vitamin that you're taking. And you're thinking, oh God, all of a sudden it's poison. Well, it turns out we eat that stuff in our normal foods anyway. Minerals and metals are part of what we eat. Now, if you ate an entire soda can, all right, that's probably a bad thing for a number of reasons. But heavy metals, whether they accumulate in your body or you excrete them, have to be at such a high level that you would be hospitalized for it. The benefit of a vaccine and the bug that's in it vastly outweighs any tiny, minuscule amount of some kind of perceived, oh my God, poison. One of the things we're seeing during this whole business of pandemic in the United States is this shifting of what medicine should we take, which one's good, what's the president saying, who's saying what, blah, 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 blah. There's two things going on. Number one, you're actually seeing science in action. When you have something like a crisis hit humanity, you're literally going to take everything in your pre-existing pharmacy and chuck it at it and hope something works, so you don't have to spend all of these months and years developing some way to help be preventative or keeping people from dying or whatever it is that slowing the spread. The hydroxychloroquine thing was one of these first things that they threw out there because it worked on some other SARS-like complexes. So they were thinking, okay, well, maybe it'll help on this one. It turns out after all kinds of data and all kinds of research, it absolutely 100% does not help in any way, and in fact can be fatal if given in too high of a dose to certain populations. Okay, check, that one didn't work. So what else is in the pool? Okay, so now they found some steroids, this remdesivir. They're looking at antibody treatments. All of these things, none of them are curative. None of them keeps you from having the bug. What they do is they keep you from dying from the bug. This is it. They hope to create a situation where if you go to hospital, if you have to stay there a week, you're actually leaving without having to be on a ventilator or anything else, okay? But what you're seeing is basically science and process. Sometimes science gets it wrong. That's okay. A wrong answer is still an answer. Great, we don't use hydroxychloroquine. What can we use? And then you carry on from there. Given enough time, we'll probably develop an actual specific drug that will address this specific virus. But right now, we don't have that. In no situation, in any country, anywhere on the planet, have we ever thought this was a good idea for solving a pandemic or even an epidemic, meaning just localized in a country or place, right? And here's why. So herd immunity, the basic concept of herd immunity is just go for it. It's chickenpox, right? Everybody gets it, and when a certain number of people get it, theoretically, maybe nobody else will get it. With chickenpox, it seems like everybody gets it, and you just get it, right? Herd immunity, the concept is, once you have about 70% of the population with the disease, remember we were talking about population biology. What does the virus want? The virus wants no vaccines. The virus wants everybody to be a completely clean slate so it can overpopulate to its heart's content. Well, in herd immunity, you're giving the virus a chance to do that. When you have a particularly deadly virus, a potentially lethal virus, or one that's a circulatory virus that can cause long-term health effects beyond the initial infection, it's really dangerous to do that because now you start doing math. The math then is we have roughly, 300 million people in the United States, right? 70% of that would be infected is over 200 million people. Of that, between 2 and 3%, which sounds like pish posh, 2 or 3% of that will die completely unattended. That's like what? Between 6 and 8%. That's not okay. 6 or 8 million people at 2 or 3%. 6 or 8 million people who lose their lives just because we're gunning it. And the secret to all of this business with COVID-19 is that no individual knows where you're going to land on the scale. You don't know once you get it if you're going to be asymptomatic, you're going to be chronically ill, or you're going to be dead. We have some reasonable information about people with pre-existing conditions that appear to be those that are very impacted. However, we've also got teenagers dead. We've also got asymptomatic college football players with arrhythmias and having heart problems because they had COVID. We don't know the long-term ramifications. We're seeing some evidence that if you have certain blood types, you might have it, even with zero other health problems. So this is still a dangerous, dangerous roll of the dice. And the reason why it came up recently politically is because there were some scientists, and you'd have to look online to read all the different names and stuff, most of it is hokum, that have decided that this is okay because they are being funded by this administration to pursue this line of thought. So basically, on its nose, without any buy-in, without any support from any other scientists in the public health arena, these guys found a way to make money. Okay, good on them. However, they have a mouthpiece in this administration that makes it quite dangerous, and a public that's quite confused at this point because we never had a national path forward through this pandemic. Herd immunity on its face comes from animal husbandry, right? It's the idea that and it's based on vaccinations. If you vaccinate 70% of your cows, then something like hoof and mouth has less of a chance to get between other cows because there's not as many hosts for that bug to get around, right? Same idea for humans. If you just allow the entire population to go for herd immunity, 70% of the population has to get that bug. In this case, we're talking about COVID-19, right? So 300 million people in the United States, that means over 200 million would be infected. And remember, you're rolling the dice every time you get infected from asymptomatic to dead. And then between 2 and 3%, depending on the population, equals basically 6 to 8 million people who might die, right? So on its nose, it seems like a great thing to do because poop, most people are asymptomatic, it's really, let's just let everybody get sick. But because you're rolling the dice with your own health and you're rolling the dice with other people's health, it just doesn't make any sense. And in terms just of a biology reason, it allows the virus to retain itself in the population, which means we're wearing masks and we're staying away from each other and staying home forever. Because the amount of population that's been infected right now in the United States is less than, of the whole population, we have 8 million people supposedly infected. That's 2% of the population? If you do the math, it'll take us 16 years to get to herd immunity. So there's been some interesting questions that have come out, and what I realize on the front end is that as a population, the United States has lost some basic understanding of health and basic understanding of biology. And so let me answer a few of these questions. One is that, okay, everybody's wearing a mask now, and we're told that we're supposed to, eat our tablespoon of dirt in our lifetime to be able to manage ourselves health-wise, right? And so theoretically, if we're wearing a mask, we're keeping all of those things from coming at us. So there's a couple of answers to that. The first is, unless you're 2 years old, you've experienced plenty of things in your life that are making you perfectly healthy. And this blip in your life, even if you have to wear a mask for the next 10 years, is not going to make that much difference unless you really seriously wear it 24/7 and are wearing the quite heavy respirator where very little gets in. Second of all, viruses, bacteria, all kinds of schmutz fly around in the air and you're getting it anyway. The minute you take your mask off to walk in your house, if air has come in your house, there's a good chance you're interacting with it in your house. The mask isn't magical. It's really just protecting you in the most intense moments of this particular pandemic. we think in science anyway, that we've answered this over and over, is where did the COVID-19 SARS-CoV-2 virus come from? And it definitively came from bats. And specifically from flying foxes, these very large bats. They're called Megachiroptera. And you're saying, well, how do you know that? How come it didn't escape from a lab? They were studying it there. Yeah, you don't want to know all the viruses that we're studying in every lab around the world. The reason they don't escape is because they're in these facilities called BSL-4s, which is the highest, most clean, most safe environments. Is it possible because we're humans that it could get out? Yeah, but it's really unlikely. And you say, well, how do you know that? How do you prove it? Well, I'll tell you how. It's called genetics. We have the virus. We've got all 7 clades of the virus. None of these clades genetically match the ones that were being used in China in particular in their laboratory as close as the ones that come from these flying foxes. Now you're saying, how do you get it from a bat? Well, if you live in some countries where these animals live, you might want to make a soup out of it. And if you do, and it's tasty to you, and it's not cooked all the way, much like how we get bacteria and other infections from our food in the United States all the time, then you possibly could get this virus. And if it jumps hosts, which is the worst thing a virus can do, because all kinds of creatures are packed with viruses. The reason why it doesn't affect us is it may not live well in a human, or it hasn't figured out a way to jump to us. This one jumped. It's most easily passed through aerosolized particles. The place on your body that receives aerosolized particles the easiest is your nose. Your nose is a passageway to your lungs. Now, typically your nose has receptors in it that block all kinds of, you are breathing in viruses all the time. You're breathing in bacteria all the time. You're breathing in dirt and dust and da-da-da. Okay, so your nose cleans that out, but this one knows how to get through the certain receptors and into your lungs. Your lungs are these moist, perfect place for the virus to set up camp, let's say. So at first we did think it was a respiratory disease because lungs would become just exploded with virus to the point where your oxygen is compromised, which is why we're saying to people wear a pulse oximeter, because we want to know what your oxygen levels are. If they really start dropping precipitously, there's a good chance that you have an infection going on in your lungs. In fact, this is much more of an important indicator than temperature for determining what's going on with a current COVID infection that is running away in your lungs. Okay. But now we've realized, and with enough data and enough time now, right, that we've been experiencing this virus as a world, we're seeing that it's actually circulatory. So what does that mean? Yes, it's impacting your lungs. Yes, it's impacting your nasal airways because that's the entry into the body. But then it immediately gets into your bloodstream like oxygen, but it's on its own pathway. And it ends up going through your system and impacting a number of things that we don't even fully understand yet. It's impacting people's hearts. It's impacting people's brains. So that means both, not only just circulatory in terms of blood, but it has a neural component as well. We haven't had enough time to sort that all out yet. Oh!
They're going to do this.
But anyway, so the idea is that yes, your lungs get impacted because that is the initial entryway, and if you have it in there long enough, are susceptible enough for it to explode in your lungs and it's not treated right away, we've learned that a lot of these drugs and steroids and things that we're taking immediately address the lungs, so you don't necessarily have to go on a ventilator. Because there's some misconception about that. Once you're on a ventilator, you're dead. Yeah, that's kind of been one of the pathways here. But not everybody who's been ventilated has died. It's more about controlling the population of virus in your lungs. But no matter how much you have, it's still being kicked out into your bloodstream and swimming around. And then it can impact your heart and your head and other things that we just don't know fully yet. But we do know that even asymptomatic people have a viral load enough that can give them long-term health effects, either neurological or circulatory directly in your heart, arrhythmias, AFib, strokes, which is blood clots to the brain, all kinds of things that are starting to pop up of these manifestations of the longer term exposure to having the virus in your body, even if when you're infected immediately, you had no symptoms. So face coverings are a big topic, right? And we're in the United States, and so we're going to throw down and want to look more decorative than the next guy and look like fashionable. There's a lot of things online that you can look at with the ratings of different face coverings and how protected you are versus other things. Bandanas are effectively rubbish. You might as well not wear anything at all. That said, if you were to sneeze and you had a bandana on, it's at least a little bit protecting the person who's near you, better than zero. So some face coverings better than none. But if you're actually going to be protecting the people you work with who are around you, the Cadillac, the gold standard, is an N95 mask, meaning that it blocks in and out about 95% of viruses and bacteria that are around, okay? Everything downgrades from there. Surgical masks, they say about 50-50. Cloth masks, about 50-50. That said, I saw a great meme once about a way to think about this. If you are outside with no pants on and you pee, you just get pee everywhere. Kind of in the wind, it's kind of everywhere. If you put on pants, if somebody else comes up to you and you're peeing and they have on pants, well, your pee can get on their pants, but it may not get on their skin. If you wear pants and you pee, now you're keeping the pee entirely in you, right? It's kind of it's gross, but it's kind of the mask thing, right? Think of pee. If you're just out peeing in the wind, everybody is subject to your pee. If you are protecting yourself with kind of a rubbishy mask, you're sort of protecting the people around you. But really at this point, if we're talking about not having spread, particularly in a closed set, forget the mask, not a net gaiter, not the cutesy cloth ones. What we want is at least the surgical mask or the N95s. And I would prefer seeing most sets wearing N95s. There's no reason to be cute among your peers. If you're going to get on an interview and you want to wear one that looks a little more decorative, great, that's fine, because you're probably away from your crew. But if you're on a set dealing with people, wear the most effective mask you can, because you don't want to become the meatpacking industry and have everybody sick and go home and now you've closed production. Here's when a face shield is effective. The only time a face shield is effective, particularly in the film industry, is if you're wearing a proper mask, covering your nose and mouth, and a face shield over it, and you're like a makeup artist, and you're going to be in somebody else's stuff. The whole point of a face shield is if the other person is not wearing a mask and they gack on you, you have one more level of protection for virus getting in your system and or your eyes. Because yes, virus can go through your eyes. It's not as high a rate as through your nose, but it is certainly possible that the virus can go through your eyes. If you're just wearing a face shield and no mask underneath it, you might as well just not even bother wearing a face shield. It's just ridiculous. It's useless. It's not helping you or anyone else. So Chris Hayes had a tweet the other day that I thought, and I may not get all of his points exactly correct, but he was pretty much right on. I mean, it started with, this particular disease, COVID-19, is transmitted through air. So wearing masks, staying away from each other, social distancing, and washing hands are all good etiquette around the world, period. This is just what we need to know. The second thing that he said that I thought was the most interesting for the United States is if there's relief packages that come out. Now, he didn't just say this himself. Other people have been saying this, but he was paraphrasing them. If relief packages are going to come out, pay bars to be closed for 9 months. Pay restaurants to be closed for 9 months. Whatever it is that they're supposed to be making, close them and pay them, and then have everyone be safe. Because if we know that there's hot spots around, and what's happening is economically they're suffering, pay them to not be open. And that is a smart thing. We're just not going to do it in this country, but it's a smart thing, because then the business owners are not affected. They're not taking a loan to help themselves and then sort of be open, but it's scary to be open. No, just close it down. Here's your money. Good day to you, because the government's asking you to do this. Now, the third thing, of course, is contact tracing, because the more you know in the population ahead of time, And the more you can inform others, positive or negative, that you had a test, but you were in a situation where you were potentially infected, the less spread there is, which helps the virus, which continues it around the world. But what is the one thing that I would say? I would say the biggest take-home message, I think, for all of us in the world is understand that 100% of human beings can get this disease. 100% of humans can then roll the dice between being asymptomatic and having long-term health issues with their circulatory system to being quite ill to dead. 100% of us, no matter the age, no matter the pre-existing condition, doesn't matter. If you're a human being on this earth, this disease is for you. So if you don't want to be sick, because being sick sucks, I mean, if you've ever had the flu or anything else, you don't want to be sick. It just sucks. Why would you want to try to have this? Why would you want to risk yourself to have it? So protect yourself. Be selfish in that way. Don't get it you won't get the flu either, potentially, because you're masking up and doing all the right things. Don't be sick. And then bonus, if you want to actually care about another human being on earth, then the rest of that narrative can follow. But at the end of the day, it sucks to be sick. Don't be sick. 100%, you included, even if you've already had it, can get this disease and potentially can get it again and potentially can get quite ill and die and then have long-term, we don't know how long, we're only October. Might have decades-long issues with this thing. We're creating pre-existing conditions. Why would you want to do that to yourself, even if you're asymptomatic? So there's a lot of crystal balling about how would we be if everybody actually followed the rules and everybody's wearing a mask and hand washing and doing all the things we want them to do. Part of the answer is that we'd have a little bit more freedom to be able to move around a bit. But that said, the virus is going to remember, the virus wants to replicate. The virus wants to explode all over humans. It just does. So any opportunity that it gets, even if we're doing all the right things, if it gets a toehold, it will still ramp up. The key and why we started this narrative early on, back in February, of this crushing the curve business, which we've all but washed our hands of in the United States, is that if you have very low virus in a community, it spreads at a much lower rate. If you have a very high level of virus in the community, it spreads at a higher rate because, let's do it just by math, right? Low level of virus in a community is one person in your 100,000 people has the virus. How often is that one person going to be spreading it around to other people? Not at the same rate as 100 people, not at the same rate as 1,000 people, right? And if we start saying in a population, we have 30,000 people that are positive, well, right, times however many people you interact with, between 1 and 20 on a close basis, right? So it's that exponential business of it. If we had crushed the curve, which we had been talking about early on, crush the curve, if we had dropped that curve to almost nil, then yeah, we wouldn't be as scared about having kids in school. Would we still have to wear masks and have good air filtration and have hand washing and all the whole bit and social distancing and contact tracing and testing? Yeah, but we'd be able to predict potentially where these hot pockets were going to pop up and then squish them before entire cities go down, swamp the healthcare system, devastate our response workers, and kill a bunch of people because we're not paying attention. That's it. So had we done the right things, now there are countries who have done that and are still seeing spikes because it's a virus, it's a pandemic, it wants to keep doing it. But they're also in a better position for having gone through it before to follow the rules and not be jerks about not wearing masks or not following the rules. Whole countries, Italy, have national policies and then say to their provinces, look, if you are demonstrating through testing that your serial prevalence, the amount of virus in the population is quite low, then you can have your bars open if people are following the rules. But you other province, if you're showing you have quite a steep infection rate, no, everything's shut down, I'm sorry, good day to you. We didn't do that in the United States. We just did this kind of a little bit of this, a little bit of that, which means We can all start doing the right thing right now, but until the numbers really trend down for every state in the nation, and because we move around and we travel and we go here and there, we continue spreading it. So that whole business of crush the curve isn't just a fiction. It's based on real math and real spread of virus. The best way to make sure you're not transmitting any virus between two people is stay away from them, so some sort of distance, and wear a mask. And after you've interacted with humans in any way, you wash your hands, right? And then you go to your own home, and that's when you can take off your mask, because theoretically you're not virusing it up at home, right? So the question then is, but if I've got a mask, how come I can't be right in each other's face? And it's partly that issue of it depends on the mask. If you are in a surgical arena and you are wearing N95s that are autoclaved and surgical grade, yes, obviously people are around each other quite closely, and they're likely not spreading a whole bunch of stuff around. But everybody I've seen in the public isn't wearing that. And so if it's a mixed bag of what people are wearing, and it's a mixed bag of ratings about what can you breathe out and what can you breathe in, just stay away from each other. It's really an easy formula. I mean, it sucks. Nobody likes this, you know? I mean, I suppose somebody somewhere might think that all of us scientists are reveling in the fact that there's a pandemic and we just love all this. No, nobody likes it. Everybody hates it. It really, really sucks. We're social creatures. We want to be all up in each other's faces. But you know what? It's not safe now, so we're not going to do it.
Hi, I'm Leslie Fleming Mitchell.
Deborah Walkshall.
And we had the luxury of interviewing Dr. Laura Marsh.
Thank you, Dr. Marsh.
Thank you so much. We are on the board of New Mexico Women in Film. And in the nature of good etiquette, we're both going to say hi to you without our masks, but not at the same time. So,
6 feet apart!
everybody's running. Hi, I'm Leslie Fleming Mitchell. Come on in.
Hey, Deborah Walkshall here. Thanks for listening and tuning in to our COVID coffee talk.
Thank you for listening to our podcast. Oh, wait, it's not a podcast. What is it?
Videocast.
Videocast.
Thank you for listening to our videocast.